Sometimes when you closely watch a supernatural horror movie, it falls apart upon examination. And I'm not going to dwell on that. I still love this movie, but I wasn't sure what to say about it. All over the weekend, I was thinking that I knew what to say, and now here I am. And watching it again last night, I thought of a different thing to say. You have to assume that if you're going to pick apart parts of a movie that there's going to be spoilers, so I'll let you know once I get past the premise and onto that part where there's no going back. So, the Mothman Prophecies stars Richard Gere, Laura Linney, Will Patton, with small but extremely important parts played by Alan Bates and Deborah Messing. Richard Gere plays an investigative reporter in D.C. I think he usually does a political beat. He has a very beautiful wife named Mary. His name is John Klein. And John Klein is standing in for John Keel, who originally wrote what was at the time a nonfiction book about the Mothman in 1975, but is now considered a novel. Don't believe it. There's a Mothman. He's real. So Mary is getting ready, making herself look good to go and meet John at this house that they're planning to buy. They sneak off into one of the closets to make out because they're so excited about buying a house. The realtor can't find them, and you can see that there's a couple of moths flying around the light in the closet. It's foreshadowing you need mothballs and a mattress in this closet. And so they decide to buy the house, and they're giggling and laughing, and they're so happy. How can things be this good? But suddenly, Mary, who is driving, sees a figure and has a one-car accident and smacks her car so hard, her head so hard against the car window that it breaks the window. And they're doing CAT scans or MRIs or something in the hospital, and they discover that she has a rare tumor. And they try to operate, but they can't get all the tumor. And she dies. And unfortunately, it is 2 years later now. And that whole part of the movie was a prologue, a prelude, a preamble. And now John is kind of suspended. He hasn't moved on. His friend wants him to move on and meet a woman at a party, but he can't stand to do it. So he sets out driving through the night to meet the governor to interview him on the other side of the state in the morning. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of water. But his car breaks down, and he goes to the nearest house, and he's met by Will Patton with a shotgun, who tells him that he's been there for the last 3 nights, acting like he's never been there before and asking to use the phone, and that Patton, whose name in this film is Gordon saw something strange about John and didn't let him in. But this time he's called the police. And the police show up in the form of Laura Linney as a very young, attractive woman sheriff. If you'll remember, women law enforcement were in vogue at the time of the late turn of the century, early 21st century, because of Frances McDormand in, I can't talk today, in Fargo. So she shows up, and she's folksy and kind, and she talks everybody down, and she takes John to stay at a motel while his car gets worked on. And that's where it comes out that he's not on the border with Virginia and West Virginia where he thought he was going. An hour and a half after he left D.C., he has somehow arrived on the border of West Virginia and Ohio, which is an impossible trip. Even if you were going 80, that would take you 6 hours, and it took him an hour and a half. On back roads, you can't do that. So he gets up in the morning, and nothing is wrong with his car, but the sheriff has admitted to him that there's been some strange goings on in the town, and he pushes her, and they go to the place where they keep all the police records, and people are reporting sightings of an 8-foot tall moth in their backyard. There's one guy who is with his girlfriend in a car, and they report a bright light that leaves a scar on his eye. And Gordon starts getting transmissions from the sink drain in his house about disasters that are going to happen in the world, and he gets them right. Like he's getting psychic flashes, and it's, he feels better knowing he's not crazy, which means he's going even crazier, is Gordon, because he thinks that he's talking to a guy named Indrid Cold. But this is just the name that the Mothman is giving himself or itself. And then there start being phone calls from Indrid Cold to John, also being able to make predictions or read his mind. We're not sure what. And in all this, John is falling in love with Laura Linney's character. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name off the top of my head. But he doesn't want to let go of Mary, who has been dead for 2 years. And I forgot to mention that before she died, Mary was drawing pictures of the Mothman because that's what she saw in the headlights and hit with the car. You could see a print of something on the front of the car. So here comes the point in every supernatural horror movie where you have to make a desperate run to another city to talk to a college professor who has all the answers. And I guess I will stop here and say that there's spoilers. My editor will put in some music. So John goes to Chicago to talk to Alan Bates, who is a professor of not psychology. I think it was physics, but he started getting these transmissions from Indrid Cold, and he tells John that you can't keep going with this. If it has brought you there to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, it has brought you there to die. And listen to me, I tried to predict a building was going to blow up, and then I got questioned for knowing that the building was going to blow up, and I spent 4 years in an insane asylum. And this is part that gets to me. The professor likens Indrid Cold to a myth in which there's a soul that's trapped in the world of the dead. And, you know, a lot of these horror movies seem like they are a representation of somebody traveling through the old mythological world of the dead in order to get to the other side. And this could be one of them. John is traveling through this terrible experience, and he's going to decide whether he's going to choose life to be with the sheriff or whether he's going to hang on to the ghost of his wife. And Indrid Cold is promising him that his wife is going to call him on the phone. And he's very conflicted. He's very upset. He's dreaming that he's banging his head against a mirror and breaking it. And to say that this guy hangs on to the past is symbolized way back at the beginning of the movie when he's traveling back and forth from the hospital where they're keeping her because she never gets out of the hospital again to his home. And I'm not sure if they bought the house that they looked at or not, but he's driving around in Washington, D.C., still with the driver's side window broken. And you know that if your wife, who is dying, had hit her head hard enough on the window to break it, and surely there would be blood. And, you know, Lee and Kate's will come to you and replace your window right there in the, the parking deck of the hospital. You don't have to drive around with a skull fracture window. But, John just hangs on to things. He can't move forward. And let me go on a little side trip. I've been on a Richard Gere kick lately, and it's because I watched American Gigolo and was very impressed with it. And I didn't know that that wasn't just a movie about like Richard Gere flexing and driving a cool car and the awesome soundtrack, which I had on vinyl for many years before I'd seen the movie. It is a movie about somebody traveling through a terrible trial as if they have died and they're coming out a different person on the other side. That I could feel that when I was watching American Gigolo, and now to see it brought up also in the Mothman Prophecies, which I hadn't remembered. I knew that I liked Richard Gere. I haven't seen a lot of his movies, probably only about 4, but what he brings to the table in both American Gigolo and the Mothman Prophecies is, as an actor, he has an ability to be extremely vulnerable, which is the sort of thing that makes a movie like this work. Because if you're trying to explain it to somebody, it's a lot of pish-posh-tosh bullshit. But it's not, because he goes all in, and so does Laura Linney, and so does Will Patton, as I'll get to in a minute. Richard Gere, he speaks softly. He comes very closely, intimately to everyone that he's talking to. He's touching people that he's talking to in the film, including Will Patton, who, this is another guy in a place like West Virginia. He's not used to a guy friend being kind and gentle. I would think West Virginia is probably like Georgia, where everyone thinks that they're badass and they're not, holding no truck with those folks from the city that are intellectual and soft-spoken. But he does, his character, Gordon, does trust John to reveal these things that make him sound like he's crazy. And in fact, he is. But he's crazy enough to go all in on Indrid cold. And what ends up happening to him is we don't know why, somehow he manages to call John on the phone after he has died, and John rushes to him, and he's dead under a tree in his backyard, having died of exposure 8 hours before. Now, if I can get off the subject of what a good actor Richard Gere is, this is what really excited me upon my most recent viewing is, you see, Gordon, he's sitting dead on the ground. He's got one leg bent behind the other leg, and the camera pulls up against the tree that he's sitting, leaning his body against, as if the Mothman flies back up in the tree. And the camera is showing Gordon upside down. And I realize this is the Hanged Man tarot card. That's exciting for me to pick out some symbolism. Gordon, he probably hasn't laid himself out like this. Probably Indrid Cold has put him like this, in very clearly in the position of the Hanged Man. Not that I believe that tarot cards predict the future, but Gordon was predicting the future. And the Hanged Man, I'll read off the internet, the Hanged Man signifies that true control can be achieved through surrender, by releasing your will and allowing things to unfold without forcing a particular outcome. It's about letting go. And what John, Richard Gere's character, needs to do is to let go. Or he needs to let go of Mary. He needs to come out of the land of the dead and go with Sheriff Laura. And poor old Gordon is a cautionary tale for him, because I know I said it was bullshit. Every supernatural horror movie has this bullshit scene where they run to a college professor who attempts to explain the unexplainable. But this movie has the added feature that Alan Bates just goes ahead and explains to us that all of this is unexplainable, that none of this makes sense. You're going to drive yourself crazy trying to figure it out. It's better to just let it go. So does John keep going on the Indrid Cold path and drive himself crazy? We don't know why Indrid Cold, We don't know why Indrid Cold can see the future. He he or it gets interested in humans who perceive it, and it likes to toy with them. And ultimately, John has to decide whether to become the hanged man. But even this falls apart because he does manage to change the future, because all of these warnings have been about, and I don't think this is a spoiler. I thought that everyone knew this, but my husband said watching this last night that he didn't know it. I thought that everybody knew that this movie was about a real bridge collapse in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in the 60s. So you're waiting the whole movie for this bridge to collapse. And it is a horrific scene. But, and they do it in real time. You see each bolt unfastening and each suspension wire breaking and hitting that one guy in the face who had been marked by the Mothman with the light causing a scar on his eye. And Laura Linney had been having dreams about falling in the water and dying and letting go and saying that it felt good in the dream. But here, John has run. He has not taken the phone call from Mary back in D.C., or not really from Mary. It's from Indrid Cold. And we're watching the bridge collapse, and it's breaking, and all the cars are falling in the water. And this gave me a phobia of bridges collapsing, but never mind that yet. And John runs and he jumps in the water and he pulls her out so that only 36 people die instead of 37. So somehow, maybe now they're going to let go. It says in the text after the movie that the Mothman has been seen around the world, but he hasn't been seen in Point Pleasant again. But we don't know what happens with John as Sheriff Laura after this. We know that he saved her life, evidently. And I have talked for a lot longer than usual. Maybe this is going to get edited, but I have to say, this did give me sort of a problem with bridges after watching it that I hadn't thought about before. I hadn't thought about how if you fall in the water, you can't open the door of the car. And when she falls in the water in her police car and he dives in, they're way down under the water, but the car hasn't quite filled up with water, and he's able to take a last breath of air where her head is above water and then pull her out. And sometimes a long time ago, I was going through a stressful period in life, and I would lie awake rehearsing what I would do if that happened. And the problem is that I live in very close to Jacksonville, Florida. Excuse me, I need another sip of water. Jacksonville, Florida, which is 95% bridge, and you have to go into Jacksonville if you want to buy anything that doesn't come from a strip mall, or buy a car not from a good old boy, or go to get surgery not from a general surgeon. It is the city, and then you can't go anywhere without driving over these bridges that are made of golf tees and Leonard Skinner records. And the problem is that we couldn't have Mothman come to Jacksonville, Florida, because we've already got a cryptid named Florida Man, and we've got a kaiju monster named Tony Khan. And then there's the ghost of, the snap into a Slim Jim guy down there in Florida. The Mothman would have some competition, so he wouldn't be able to warn us about a bridge collapsing down there. So it's something to think about. I try not to go to Jacksonville if I can help it, but sometimes I have to do. And I just have to let it go. I have to not stay awake thinking about what if I drive off this bridge when I go to Jacksonville tomorrow, because then I might end up like Gordon as a cautionary tale to others about why you should get some sleep before you have to go drive around in stressful conditions. So it's been a little over 20 minutes. This is twice as long as I wanted it to be. I just really like this movie. I really wanted to tell you about it. And I'm going to fly away now. Have a good day.